Welcome to Clarkston Lighthouse Guidance. I am Chandler Fleming, owner and lead therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling.
And I'm Victoria Fleming, co-owner and therapist at Clarkston Lighthouse Counseling. In our show, we discuss and explore psychological topics that affect us all, including relationships, parenting, and issues such as depression, anxiety, and substance abuse. We will draw on our training and experience to help guide you through life's challenges.
Please let us know what subjects interest you by sending these ideas to our Facebook page. In some shows, we'll answer questions directly from the viewers. So send in your questions and you may find us talking about them on the air. My daughter mentioned that I should let you guys know that it's completely confidential, so won't tell you who sent the questions in, but looking forward to those questions on Facebook.
And like you said, you may find it on the air. So today's topic, Chandler, major depression. It's more than just the blues.
It sure is.
You know, it's a big topic. In fact, it's such a big topic that we decided to make it into 2 shows.
Yes.
Just so that we didn't feel rushed in any way. We want to make sure we cover what major depression is and then look very closely at what the treatment is. But Chandler, I thought it might be helpful for those watching today to know a little bit about your background. I know we're going to discuss mine in another show, but you know, what is your background that brings you here today?
Sure. So I started out in the mental health field working as a mental health tech. I actually had a psychology professor say to me, "Hey, you're a pretty big guy, and do you need a job?" And I said yes. So I was a glorified orderly, a mental health tech at a psychiatric hospital. I worked with adults and kids and ran groups and had a lot of fun. Learned a lot about medication and how to do more informal counseling because I didn't even have my college degree at that point. But while around the same time, I was working on my bachelor's degree from Southeastern College, now Southeastern University, and then went on and got my master's degree from Virginia Commonwealth University, and it was a top 10 school. It was kind of cool. Victoria and I took our classes together. We used to sit there, eat pretzels, and drink our Coke. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, a little energy punch to get us through because we were working full time and getting experience as we worked and went to school. And okay, so once you finished your degree from Virginia or from your undergraduate degree, and then we're working toward your master's, what were some of your experiences and after working? I worked
at a lot of different positions. Worked on an outpatient clinic a number of times, but worked as a clinical director and administrative director for a large part of my career throughout the Southeast and Midwest. Ran psychiatric inpatient units and did clinical training with the staff, but also the business end of things. Ran some fairly large outpatient clinics with psychiatrists and doctors. And then for the last 10 years, or really last 12 years, I've just been doing traditional outpatient therapy. Worked in Troy for about 10 years and have been on my own for about 2 years. Love what I do, love doing more direct patient care. And it allows me to stay current in the field, and I always say my clients are probably my number one teacher. They teach me a lot about what's going on and how to go about things. And hey, have you read that new article? So I want to give a lot of thanks to my former clients and parents who taught me a lot.
In the current and future that we're going to have that are going to continue to challenge and teach us. So as we go into this topic of major depression, I know you and I were brainstorming and saying I think it's important for people to know what it's not so that we don't have just a big concern about, oh gosh, I felt really down before, and I have a neighbor who hasn't come out of the house all winter long or something, and kind of trying to differentiate, because the neighbor, it may be major depression if they haven't come out of the house all winter, but it could also just be the blues. Here in Michigan, in so many places where it's just cold and we're tired of being inside, the winter blahs, then it could be the blues, where we're just hungry for spring. So let's kind of talk about what the blues are, so that people can rule out major depression or blues. What are the blues?
Well, the blues are temporary. We all get the blues from time to time. Maybe a slight disappointment will set us back. The blues Usually we don't see the physical symptoms. We don't see the overeating and the sleeping to go with it. Although I know a lot of people who share some Haagen-Dazs or Ben and Jerry's when they get the blues. But the blues are overcome by positive stuff. You can distract and talk yourself out of it. And the blues can kind of be explained away by just kind of normal fluctuations. It's important to differentiate between the blues and depression, though, because oftentimes I do see people who have suffered from depression for a long period of time.
Right.
And they don't want to get help. Oh, it's just the blues. Oh, it'll go away. In most depression, it just doesn't go away. It sticks around and it has a negative effect on people's lives. So yes, the blues are out there, but if things are serious like suicidal thoughts and not getting out of bed and unable to sleep multiple nights in a row, it's probably more than just the blues.
Right. So I know for me, if I have the blues, I can end up getting a friend call and say, hey, let's go to the movies, or hey, let's go shopping. And I actually have the motivation, and that's enough of an environmental change to help me kind of break through and not be so lethargic. All right, so blues are not as intense.
Yes.
They're not as long, and they're definitely not as severe. Definitely not as severe. Okay, so then you did already mention some of the criteria, or some of the symptoms of major depression. So if it's not the blues, if it is something that's more enduring, if it is something that a friend can call me and ask me to go to the movies and I'm like, not interested, won't go, what are we looking at? How many people struggle with that kind of depression, major depression?
It's really hard to tell. There's a lot of statistics out there. We know, one set of statistics talks about 1 out of 10 women and 1 out of 20 men during their lifetime will suffer from depression. There's another study out there that talks about in any 2-week period of time in the United States, about 7.8% of the people are currently suffering from a serious form of depression.
Wow.
So it's pretty prevalent.
Okay, so I'm kind of curious. We're looking at twice as many women as men. I know that when we did communication, women use 25,000 words, men use 5,000 words. Could there be any link into why, women and men are different?
They are. And some of it may be social, that men are socialized to just suck it up and not talk about it. Men tend to, in times of crisis, become more inward, so they don't verbalize those feelings of depression. They just kind of stew on them. From men are from Mars, women are from Venus. The man runs to his cave. So a man may be depressed more often, but just less willing to admit it. We also think there could be just physiological differences, hormonal changes, things along those lines. But there are definitely indications that women suffer from depression quite a bit more than men do.
Okay. But you are saying that there may be more men out there that may be wrestling with major depression, but are calling it something different.
Right. So a lot of times they'll call it anger. So irritability is definitely a symptom of depression. So it may get missed because they're angry all the time, as opposed to more of the sadness side of the mood. And also, men are much more willing to say, hey, I'm stressed out. So when they go to the doctor, they don't really talk about feeling sad. They go, things are rough at work, and I can't sleep, and I'm eating all the time, and I just feel really anxious. So there's a lot of overlap in the symptoms of depression and anxiety. So a man may be more likely to be diagnosed with anxiety than he will be diagnosed with depression.
Okay, so, and then that's where a mental health therapist can be helpful.
Yes.
Because they can help even further, help the man in particular identify, okay, what's really going on here? Whereas perhaps in your annual checkup or going in for a sickness, a doctor may not have the time over several sessions to help that person filter out what's going on.
Right, and I think it's important to kind of filter out, although interestingly enough, a lot of the medications that are used for depression are now the leading medications used for the treatment of anxiety.
Okay.
And some of the forms of talking therapy that are for depression, because there's so much overlap in the symptoms, cognitive behavioral therapy looks at those thoughts, and if that thought is I'm overwhelmed or I'm sad, you can kind of use the same approach. So it's kind of interesting. Overall, lots of people like good diagnosis, but I think effective treatment isn't driven by diagnosis. It's really driven on what's the solution and what's the problem.
Okay.
And I know tons and tons of people, well, one doctor said I had major depression, recurrent, mild, and another person said that I had generalized anxiety disorder. Which one is it? Well, there's a lot of overlap.
Right.
And we could spend some time, and there's definitely ways of definitively diagnosing and telling the difference. But one of the frequent sayings I say in therapy is, when you're lost in the woods, find your way out first. Find out where you went wrong second. So
Okay, but we do use a diagnostic manual.
We sure do.
To help us identify what's going on and can help sort through generalized anxiety versus major depression. So let's talk about what the major depressive symptoms are.
Sure. So major depression has kind of two clusters of symptoms. The physical ones. So
Right.
there is sleep, appetite, energy level, either psychomotor, agitation, or retardation. So either somebody's agitated, they're pacing and are very, very fidgeting, or they're kind of slow and sluggish. So those are kind of fatigue, loss of energy.
I find the agitation one interesting because I think most people think of Eeyore.
Yes.
If you are majorly depressed, Eeyore.
Yeah.
Super slow, no motivation, takes a long time to get from point A to point B, but there are times where a person has, like you said, that agitation. Any reason for the difference? Why retardation versus agitation?
Some of it is just coping skills, and personality type. I know some people who, when they get anxious, they sleep all the time. As opposed to it, I know a lot of people who, when they get depressed and anxious both, but they can't sleep at all. So it's coping strategy.
Okay. So some of it is personality.
Some of it's
how
personality.
we exhibit, even in our symptoms, is in some form personality driven.
Oh, yeah, for
All right,
sure.
so we've looked at some of the biological, physiological, and then let's also look at the thinking.
Yes.
Thinking in major depression changes. It changes. For a person who is majorly depressed, unlike the blues where it's like, oh, it's just the weather, oh, it's just, the person can be thinking, I need to get up, and just truly can't find that motivation, and it's just too hard. They'll
Sure.
think I should get up, but it's just too hard, and there's guilt. There can be guilt and shame and just a prevailing, persistent negativity,
Yeah.
Depression,
Yeah.
just a persistent depression. And then sometimes it gets so bad that it's then suicidal thoughts.
Right.
I just can't do this anymore.
Yeah. And we call that stinkin' thinking. That negative, everything is bad thinking. And it's very real to the individual. They really
Absolutely.
feel like this is their reality.
And I'd want to be careful calling it stinking thinking, because there's stinking thinking out there among people who can change it.
Yes.
And need to change it, where they just see the glass half empty all the time. But with major depression, we may want to think, oh, if they would just change their thoughts. We even like, if I could just shake them a little bit and like snap out of
Right.
this. But with major depression, that's not the case.
And it's interesting because with major depression, on the more severe side, so there's major depression, very severe with psychosis and a lot of crazy thoughts, major depression severe, and then there's moderate and mild. And it's one of those situations where we do have some limited control on the choices we make.
Absolutely.
And, some people do need to, push themselves to do better.
Right.
But it's hard. It's much, much more difficult than people realize. And somebody who's never experienced major depression, they really don't understand how difficult it is. A lot of times I'll have a parent who comes in with their teenager, and they're pretty frustrated with their teenager. It's, why won't they take a shower? Why won't they do these sort of things? And this particular parent may be overweight. And I kind of use it as an example for them. Why are you overweight? Well,
Right.
I know I'm overweight. I know that things are difficult. I try to diet. Well, if you just diet, you won't be overweight. Well, it's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to do it. And yes, if you are depressed, you gotta find that energy. You gotta find that place where you push yourself to do more, to force yourself to get out of bed. But a real big theme here is depression is real. Depression is like any other illness, and there are things you can do to help, but there's also things that can be quite difficult, and learning to push yourself is really, really important. And then it's also, it's real for those that are around you. It can be a very frustrating thing to watch somebody be depressed.
I agree.
So,
it's painful
it is
to watch
painful.
someone be depressed. And then if they do say something like, this is too hard, I just don't want to live anymore, this is too hard,
Yes.
then we're looking at the suicide.
Right, and suicide, what a tragedy. It's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. We know that women are much more likely to make a suicide attempt, and about 3 times as likely as a man. And a man is about 4 times as likely to complete suicide.
And we know that because of the methodology.
Well, we think it's methodology, but we also think it's intent. That men have what we sometimes refer to as waffle brain, where their brain are designed in a way that there's much more connections going front and back.
Right.
So there's not that going side to side over the emotional side of the brain to the more thinking side of the brain. So when a man decides, oftentimes he decides and he does it. Where a woman, she decides to do it, but there's still a part of her that may be holding back. And so less lethal means. Sadly, over time, women are becoming much more like men, so we are seeing a rise in suicide in completion of women, and also a rise in much more lethal means in women also.
Okay, and there seems like there's oftentimes a big emphasis on suicide among teenagers.
Yes.
And I think in great part because they have their whole life in front of them, and so it's so tragic that a young person didn't get that help, and yet the statistics really don't show that they're the leading ones to commit suicide and complete suicide.
Yeah, really older people, older white guys, about 60% of all completed suicides are amongst people who are 55 and older white males. So it is definitely a lead cause.
And actually the highest number was among the elderly, men who are elderly, who are divorced or widowed.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a population that doesn't necessarily get a lot of attention.
Sure.
And it's one that we do need to be aware of.
So one of the things I really wanted to stress in this particular show is what's called the SAD person. And it's a risk assessment. How do you know who's most at risk for depression? So the S is for sex. Male sex is much more likely. Then age, we see higher before the age of 19 and after the age of 45. Obviously, the presence of depression, that's the D. P is for previous attempts. The greatest predictor of future behavior is past behavior. E is for excessive alcohol or substance abuse. We know that people who abuse alcohol are 7 times more likely to commit suicide.
Absolutely.
The R is for rational thinking loss. So there's a certain level of psychosis or craziness. We know that about 15% of all suicides are amongst people who have a serious thought disorder. And then social support is lacking. They really don't have things that build them up. We know that divorced people and single people have a much, much higher rate of suicide than married people. We also know that their plan is quite organized. When they talk about how they're going to do it, it's a lethal plan, and they kind of have given some thought to it. So their plan to go through with it is organized. And then N is no spouse, as we mentioned before. It kind of lack of social support. And then the people who are physically ill also have a really high rate of suicide. And this was a method that was kind of given, a guy named Patterson made it up to teach residents how to assess for suicidal thoughts.
Right, and it's an excellent tool. So SAD persons.
Yep.
And so that would be a way for a person to be able to identify if this was just an off-the-cuff comment.
Right.
Versus a more serious, we need to get help. And I don't think we should ever look at it as a manipulation.
Right, but manipulation plays a role in it, and it's hard to tell what is manipulation, how we define manipulation. We all want things, and we all fight really, really hard to get those things. So a lot of times we're not really straightforward in how we ask for things. But people who are in a really bad situation, they may be crying out for help, and it may seem like a manipulation to you, but to that person, it's their way of letting you know, hey, there's something seriously going on here. And so I really ask people to kind of look for what's real. You know, are they really not getting out of bed? Are they really not doing things that are enjoyable?
To them, like they used to golf all the time and now they're not golfing, or they used to love going shopping with you and no longer want to go shopping. That's real.
Right. And you know, a lot of times we get caught up in looking for what's not real, so I encourage people to look for what's real. And it, you know, unfortunately, for people who suffer from depression and really loved ones, it's difficult for them to accept that their loved one may be suffering from depression.
And maybe feeling suicidal. But if they are, there is help.
Yes, there is.
You know, there are things that can be done, and that's how we would want to, you know, conclude this portion.
Yes.
Is with the fact that if you know someone who has exhibited any of the symptoms of major depression and have caused you to feel concerned, then please reach out, call, and let us know.
So thank you for joining us today, and if you have any questions, feel free to give us a call at 248-245-1809, or you can email us at guidance@clarkstonlighthousecounseling.com. Again, that email address is guidance@clarkstonlighthousecounseling.com. Enjoy your day.
Thank you for joining us.
The views expressed in this show are for general educational purposes only and do not constitute professional advice on any subject matter, nor do they necessarily reflect the views or opinions of its guests or of Independence Television. If mental health assistance is needed, please seek professional licensed treatment.